Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Town Board Work Session for Tuesday, April 3rd, 2018. Please rise and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tonight is a work session, and I'm going to make a few announcements. Although we have a lengthy work session agenda, I'm going to keep the announcements brief. I do want to remind everybody that work session means that we are not receiving any public comment tonight. And I'll state this again later, but just to remind everybody that as far as the River Knoll project, there is a public hearing tomorrow night at the planning board, and you will be able to weigh in with comments then if you haven't. If you pay your taxes directly to the town and not through a mortgage company, you should have received your 2018 town-county tax bill late last week. You still have several weeks to pay before a penalty will begin to accrue, but keep an eye on the calendar. April 30th is the deadline for paying your taxes without penalty. May will be here before you know it. Pay in person at 16 Croton Avenue during normal business hours or pay anytime online. You can also mail your payment, but due to the inconsistent postal service many of us have experienced as of late, we might advise that you consider another method of payment if possible. Speaking of the post office, they will have two events coming up later this week that may interest you. This Friday morning, April 6th at 10:30 a.m., learn more about dog bite prevention. And unfortunately, that is a challenge for many postal workers, and you can learn a little bit more about how you might be able to prevent that. Recently, I learned that there was an entire neighborhood in the town that was not receiving mail because of a dog in the neighborhood that was left unsecured. So it can really have consequences, even if it is not your own dog. On Saturday, from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. at the Austin Post Office, join some of the senior postal staff for a We're Listening weekend. Come with your suggestions, praise, and or complaints to share with the staff. Unfortunately, this is a weekend that was scheduled Westchester-wide, and the new Austin postmaster happens to be on vacation this week, but I was assured that the next person most senior will be there. Tomorrow night, I will be attending the Energize New York annual meeting. Our recently adopted legislation to allow PACE 2.0 borrowing in Austin is just one of the many items that will be discussed. I look forward to sharing more with you about Energize's progress in making New York State's infrastructure more energy efficient in the near future. Also on Saturday, many of us will be attending IFCA's 50th anniversary celebration. We are very much looking forward to recognizing our own town clerk, Marianne Roberts, for her long-standing commitment to Austin. And this is just one of the many hats she wears or has worn over the years to that end as a board member of IFCA. Finally, the event that my office staff has been talking about for weeks is almost here. On Sunday, April 8th, First Village Coffee on Main Street will be hosting Westchester's first ever vegan pop-up shop, starting at 12 noon. If you aren't a regular like we are, Peaceful Provisions, a vegan bakery, has been baking out of First Village for a few months and has been very successful. So much so that they are bringing some more vegan friends to Austin this week. Come sample snacks from Cheesehound, Freakin' Vegan, Gone Pie Vegan Bakery, Eat Nice Foods, Screamers Pizza, and grab some gifts for your animal-loving loved ones from Rudder and Fern, who will have a beautiful selection of sustainable body products and housewares for sale. There will also be a raffle, with all proceeds going to benefit Safe Haven Farm Sanctuary. Located in the mid-Hudson Valley, Safe Haven Farm Sanctuary is home to more than 100 rescued farm animals. They work diligently to restore the wonderful beings in their care to health and provide them with a lifelong home where they can live in peace and surrounded by love for the rest of their lives. Raising awareness about the plight of animals raised for food and the benefits of a vegan diet for the animals' human health and the environment is at the core of their efforts. Consider participating for $10 a ticket, going to a very worthy cause. Do any of my board colleagues have any other announcements? Alrighty. So tonight we are going to start with the presentation on River Knoll from Glenn Vetchermile, who's the principal of Glenville. The Rivernoll project has been before the planning board for over a year, and they have submitted their DEIS, or Draft Environmental Impact Statement, for public comment. The planning board has approved the DEIS as being final, and now they are going to start taking public comments. The public hearing will take place before the planning board, as I mentioned, tomorrow night, Wednesday, April 4th, at the community center beginning at 7:30 p.m. We have our planning consultant, David Stallman, here as well, to help the board understand the alternatives being presented, as this project may ultimately come before this town board if approved by the planning board and if a zoning change is required. If you wish to have a look for yourself, and you haven't already, the entire DEIS is posted on the town website for your perusal. Go to the planning board project page to learn more. Good. You're on.
Hello?
Okay, there we go. Hi, I'm Glenn Vetramile, the sponsor developer of Rivernoll, and I'm going to try to do all this in half an hour. So tonight, I thought we'd go over the timeline of the seeker process that we've gone through thus far, give you a little overview of the project, and then discuss the highlights of the draft environmental impact statement. Open space, traffic issues, school issues, etc. And then also talk about some of the alternatives. Joining me tonight is Mark Ferraro with the traffic consulting firm of JMC. They also do civil engineering work, so he'll speak on that. So we began this process back in the fall of 2014. When we got into contract on the site, we began our design and programming, and then submitted an EAF about a year later, beginning of that year, and then we got into, we decided with the new administration to do an EIS, which is requires a scoping process. That was finished in the spring of 2016, and then we submitted our first draft of the EIS February of 17, comments from the consultants in April. We resubmitted the draft in June of 17, more comments in July of 17, resubmitted the draft a third time, December of last year, more comments, and then the final was submitted beginning of this year with the notice of completion. And just so everybody understands the breadth of what we've done. This is the first EAF. This is the second EIS. This is the third round. This is the fourth round. And this is the final. Each one of these documents has several appendices, traffic appendices, etc. And each document is about 800 pages. So the project, this is what we hope it will look like. Just some early images, a little bit about me. I'm not going to dwell on myself. This is a project that I finished last year that is down in Tuckahoe. It's called Quarry Place. Very proud of it. It's done very well, and it's met with very warm welcome with the town. The current hospital consists of, use a pointer, multiple buildings. The project we're talking about will sit here. This building and all of these buildings here will be raised, and all of this area will be converted to open space. The existing building, one you see at the top of the hill, has been altered significantly over the years. We've done a full historic analysis on it, which has been accepted by SHPO, State Historic Preservation Office. just some views of those buildings, all in disrepair, and all of them are boarded up, and they're completely dysfunctional for the hospital use or a readaptation. The hospital, I'm not going to dwell here, but had 3 shifts, one in the morning, one around dinner time, one in the evening, about 250 full-time employees, and had daily deliveries, the patients being sent to various area hospitals. So, a big part of our design is to preserve the open space. The front of our project along Croton Dam Road, that whole meadow, which is about a quarter of a mile length, won't be touched. This is another view of it. Another view. We've been careful to preserve these areas. This is the meadow that heads down towards Pershing. Again, that'll be preserved. It'll actually be enhanced because there are a number of buildings. You can sort of see the edge of one of the homes down there. That'll be raised and converted to green space. Another one of the homes that'll be raised, converted to green space. And kind of walking around the site, this is the area, heading out towards the park. And I guess it in the past has been used as a toboggan run. That'll remain green space. This is the front of the site looking out towards the Hudson. That'll all stay green. And so we created a bunch of site objectives. One was to put the building in the center of the site, preserve all those green spaces, make sure the building is lower than the existing Stony Lodge hospital structures, maintain only the one access point on Croton Dam Road, and install state-of-the-art stormwater management. Some of the homes at the south end do experience today a lot of runoff. All of that today will be controlled. We first, back in 2015, had this initial concept with 4 buildings, and we felt that combining them all into one structure did accomplish several things. It allowed us to make all of this area green space, Narragansett being here first, second, and third, and then Pershing down here, and of course Croton down here. Essentially a donut building with a beautiful interior garden and parking all underneath, a porte cochere here and a little bit of perimeter parking here, and these have views out to the Hudson. But the upshot is that 75% of the site will remain green and preserved. The bright green areas show essentially the either hard surfaces for parking or buildings that will be turned into new green space. They're currently existing hospital structures. And what this shows is a cross-section of what we propose. This would be if you were driving along on Croton Dam Road here, and then there's a fairly steep outcropping with trees that will remain, be hidden behind this. And then Pershing is way the heck down here. It's almost about 1/3 of a mile away. And then, I'm trying to remember the avenue at the north, up here. I think it's Narragansett. Not sure. I should know. And then the interior courtyard with parking underneath. This is the program. We're talking about 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom units only. We have market rate units, 169, and then we're going to build 19 affordables, all within the same structure. There'll be no differentiation between the affordable and the market rate. The underground parking and then some surface. We're grossly overparked here with ride sharing today. Uber and all these other modes of transportation, all of our forward planning on our projects were reducing the amount of parking. And in some cases, where we have parking structures, we're looking to design them so that some of those levels in the future can be converted to units, because we think there's going to be such a drop in demand for parking. The project will have, as I said, garage parking. It'll have elevators in each building, an outdoor pool, gardens, a fitness center, yoga studio, a club room, business center, daycare for dogs, maybe cats, concierge, and we're going to have a jitney to take people up to the Croton station and also into downtown Ossining services and Ossining station. And then we will have a refrigerator room at the front so that people getting packages and food delivered, prepared meals, can pick them up at night. Some of the units all have washer dryers, walk-in closets, etc. So we decided that we liked the thought of Hudson and Adirondack style, so we began looking at all different inspirations throughout the valley, both new and old. Some in more contemporary contexts, but with large timbers, overhangs, a certain color palette, interesting windows, stone bases, to translate into early thoughts about the project. This would be the entrance. This is another color scheme we're thinking about with brighter trim, dark banded windows. The front. And that would be the view from Croton Dam looking up the hill. Exact same view that you would see here with the front meadow. And that would be a winter scene. You'd see it kind of peeking through the top. And this would be a view from 2nd Avenue, kind of peeking through the trees. This is 2nd Avenue in the middle of summer, and so forth. The one thing I'll point out here is that throughout the greater Ossining community, there are a lot of townhouses, there are a lot of older apartment buildings, there are a lot of small lot homes, large lot homes, and all of those appeal to different demographics. One thing that is missing is a carefree residence in sort of a congregate setting for empty nesters. And empty nesters who children have gone off, they want to maybe monetize their homes because they don't want to pay taxes anymore, want more freedom to travel. This type of property is ideal. They can move in here, have carefree living, all of their services are taken care of, and travel, maybe have an extra bedroom for their kids to come home for holidays. So the areas of the EIS that, I'm not going to go through them all today because you'd be here till midnight, but they get into everything. This has been going on for 3.5 years, and we've gotten into all of these various areas. As Dana said, you can go online and get, knee deep in what's been looked at. All of this has been reviewed thoroughly by David and Kathy Zalentis, counsel to the planning board. But 3-4 areas that I think kind of rise to the surface would be certainly traffic, schools, alternative uses, and what this looks like visually. So I thought we'd dive into those now. So on the traffic side, I'm going to hand the microphone over to Mark, who's worked on this. And you can...
Hello, good evening. My name is Mark Pachoro from JMC, as Glenn previously stated. Worked on the traffic aspect of this project. We studied 9 intersections. Previously, the first traffic study incorporated 6 intersections. It's been expanded to incorporate 9 intersections shown here in this figure that's on the slide here. It's basically intersections along Croton Dam Road from Route 9A down towards Dale Avenue.
That's, is that 9A? Yes, that's 9A. And then Croton Dam Avenue going all the way down to Dale Avenue, Hawks Avenue. So
Correct.
this is the project site right here, and that's the entrance.
So traffic counts were done at these intersections. Peak hours were identified during those counts. We analyzed the peak weekday AM hour, peak weekday PM hour, as well as a peak Saturday hour. We then interpolated out these traffic volumes by projecting additional traffic volumes for general growth, as well as incorporating other developments in the area to analyze the no-build condition during those 3 peak hours, as well as a build condition. The no-build condition incorporates the reoccupancy of the former hospital use and just the future traffic volumes. The build condition would analyze that same future year, but with the proposed development. So at the intersection of the levels of service, the traffic is actually graded essentially in levels of services, and it's related to delay that's experienced at the intersections. And the levels of services in the future with the development is comparable to the no-build condition as far as levels of service, which would incorporate the reoccupancy of the hospital. We did propose signal timing changes at the 9A and Croton Dam Road intersection. However, due to concerns that neighbors raised, we looked at potential additional improvements that could be done at this intersection of 9A and Croton Dam Road. So it was recommended during our study that right turn lanes be constructed along Croton Dam Road and both approaches of 9A there. As you can see here in this figure, it shows the right turn lanes, the additional widening, and then the larger right turn lane on the north side of the intersection. This improvement actually does incorporate a signal timing change as well. Currently, the traffic signal operates at a 150-second cycle. We would propose to reduce that cycle length to 110 seconds. So a lot of times there's some delay related to how long the cycle is on that traffic signal. So with these recommended improvements,
You should describe what the improvements are. What's exactly the addition.
so right now Croton Dam Road is one lane in each direction, as everyone might be aware of. We would widen on each side of Croton Dam Road to provide the right turn lane that you see in this figure here. That would provide additional capacity for vehicles to be processed through the intersection, and also
It's essentially 2 lanes here. It will be 2 lanes versus 1 lane.
yes.
And similarly, on the east side of the intersection, this is heading up towards Road. Another lane is added here. So as you're approaching the intersection heading west, you have the ability to stack. You no longer have to stack. You can wrap around.
No problem. These recommended improvements of the right turn lane and the traffic signal timing improve the traffic flow and operations in the build condition, being with the project volumes and with these improvements compared to the no-build condition. This traffic study with these improvements and everything that you see on the website, that's on the town's website, has been submitted to the New York State DOT as far as the traffic aspect. They have reviewed this and they are in concurrence with the findings that we had provided to them in the traffic study, and they concur also with the proposed improvements of constructing the right turn lane in each direction on the Croton Dam Road approaches to this intersection.
So what happened with this was we got into conversations with a bunch of the neighbors, and one of the issues that left off the page was traffic. this intersection. And so we took it upon ourselves to approach DOT and to submit this plan. So it was not something that was required, it's something we're doing at our own cost. So the school area is obviously an area that everybody's concerned about with the crowding of the school today. We met with the school board and the school administration 3 years ago and began a discussion as to how to best handle the planned children that would be generated by our project. We looked at 3 ways of figuring out what that would be. The first being the Rutgers methodology, and there are 2 professors at Rutgers University, Rochelle and Listigan, and they prepare annual lists and data on how the expected generation will come off of houses or multifamily, both urban and suburban. The school district itself, when it projects forward for growth, it uses the same methodologies. Separately, we took a look at the similar projects throughout the county, many of which are built by Avalon. You have one here in Ossining. There are several there's one in Harrison, there's one in Bronxville, there's one in New Rochelle, et cetera, et cetera. Looked at all of those as similar size and of similar quality to get a sense of what they were throwing off in terms of children. And then thirdly, we went to another consulting firm called Bay Area Economics. So we looked at all 3, and then we created this schedule of what each projected. In the Rutgers model, projected about 26, Bay Area 26, and then the average actual of locals is 22, and that is similar to what is the experience on a ratio basis to the Avalon here in Ossining. We then said, okay, it's going to range somewhere in there, and we picked the high end, and then we looked at ways we could help the school district mitigate this impact. And we entered into an agreement, which has just been renewed, where we will make direct payments to the school district so that they can improve certain areas of the schools at their determination going forward. As part of the, so I'm going to get into alternatives. So as part of the analysis, we got into an exhaustive look at what are other ways of building on this site, not just our proposal, and we first looked at R15 zoning, which is essentially the underlying zoning. And in order to build, if you were to use that methodology, this would be a sample of, or representative of how the site might be built out. The site would lose green space. You'd only have little bits of green space. The stands of trees throughout the site, particularly there's a large one in the front where there's a rock outcropping, that would all go away, as would all the other stands. You'd lose the buffers, and then that big meadow area along Croton Dam Road would be an obvious place to build because it's one of the flattest areas. You'd end up with much more infrastructure, more roads, more stormwater, more porous surfaces, and you'd also end up, most importantly, with many more kids because single-family homes are big generators of kids. People that buy these have kids. So the ratio of kids being thrown off these projects, these homes, relative to the tax revenues generated are tax negative. This would be a tax negative solution. Similarly, we then looked at smaller lot zoning. R15 zoning, which is one of the zones in the town. And the issues get even worse. More pervious surfaces, more infrastructure, no green space, and much greater tax deficit. And all of this is in a table online in the EIS. You can go to it. It all shows the calculations for all this. We looked at R5 conventional, same issues, no green space, tons of road. And with additional road, please remember, you got to put the water somewhere. And the water's got to go in detention basins. And those detention basins get large. And then all that water's got to go into the stormwater system in the road eventually. This is just doing the same thing in the same footprint of ours. It's essentially the same result as ours. This is using multifamily MF zone, one of the existing zones in town. Using the MF zone as a townhouse solution, you get a teeny bit more green space along the edge here, a little bit down here, but the rest is all going to be pervious surfaces. Everything would be scraped in order to build this. All the trees would come down during construction. There'd be tons of additional piping, stormwater, sewer lines, etc. Essentially, MF zone applied to our footprint. Another MF zone at 8 per acre. They all come out the same way. I could get into more discussion on stormwater, but I think I've done enough. Okay? Did I do it in a half minute?
Read it. Thank you.
You want me to take questions, or?
Sure. Yeah, does the board have any questions? I mean, I thought we were maybe gonna have David maybe answer the questions for us. You guys, board members want to start with some questions for Glenn? Glenn, can you come out from there so
Sure.
we can see you without straining our neck? Maybe you can come over. Even, you could have a chair if you'd like and sit over here.
Okay.
Would be preferable. Okay?
Want me to put a picture up?
My first question is going to be about the traffic study. You did the traffic study as the conditions is as if the hospital was in full swing?
In the no building.
Right, so there's not a traffic study in the as-is condition?
Yes, there is. There's existing, there's no
Can you
build.
use,
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
There's existing, no build, and build. We analyzed all 3 of those scenarios, and during each one of those scenarios, we analyzed each peak hour as well. It's listed in the traffic study.
Okay. And the state's okay with your timing change, and they've approved all of your conceptual plans?
Correct. They actually allow us to proceed to the next stage, which is actually define detailed construction plans to construct those improvements that I had shown on my figure.
Okay, and the number for the Ossining Avalon, is that an actual number of kids attending the schools or an estimated number?
No, we got that. I'm trying to remember the source, but we got it from, I believe we got it from the tax authority, or tax department, I think. Pretty sure it's been. I can double check that,
Yeah,
but
we can
I'm sure it
check.
hasn't changed much, but I'll double check, sure.
I'm interested to know about, Avalon and Herbert Square, how many actual kids are attending the schools?
Mm.
In the final EIS, you talk about the assumption of percentage of people who will move from Ossining or downsize from Ossining, and the percentage who may come from someplace else. What did you base that on?
Well, in terms of traffic review, this is designed.
No, in terms of people, I'm sorry, I'm shifting gears. In terms of people who will move into the apartments.
I don't know if we make any empirical assumptions relative to people outside of town. But we view this market as a greater Ossining market, including the town and village, Briarcliff, and surrounding towns. The further northeast you go, the fewer of these settings there are. We see this as an empty nester appealing project. That's who we first and foremost want to market this to. And so we kind of know through all sorts of demographic data how big that is. Numbers-wise, I can get you that. I don't have it off the top of my head. We did careful looking at the projects down in, down in Terrytown, Briarcliff, White Plains. We know like the back of our hand because we've done a bunch of things down there. And we are very close to the Avalon people, so we have their data, just know them. I know Martin Ginsberg, I can call him, I suppose he might share that with me. But I think it's an interesting contrast, talking about the Avalon project and the Ginsberg project. The Avalon project is a younger project because it does not have any elevators. So an older renter would not be, or an empty nester would not be inclined to want to rent there, nor would that demographic want to have a place that doesn't have parking. A woman, coming home at 10 o'clock at night with a bag of groceries in their hand doesn't want to walk across a rainy or snowy parking lot to get into their unit, or have to walk down or walk up. And we know from the turnover, the project's been around now 2 years, that the people who have been there that are older don't see it as such a good fit. Younger people like it very much. And similarly, the Ginsberg project is more of a younger, appealing project by virtue of where it's located down the water. Contrasting that with ours is a green project. We think people who have houses will like it more. People with dogs will like it more. That's why we have the dog spa plan, because they will walk around. And so we think it's ideal for that demographic. And the parking.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for your presentation and for all the work that you've done. And I know that you have been put through the ringer to a certain extent by the planning board, and we appreciate all the work that you've done on looking at alternatives. I'm not sure if this is a question for you, Glenn, or for David, but when we're looking at the alternatives, there was the one with I can't remember if it was the R40 or the R15, where you talk about the impact to the wetland that's on the property and how it would have greater impact, and you talk about building. I think most of them, all of them, you were building on that Croton Dam Road green knoll. I remember in some previous discussions that somebody somewhere along the line said that would never happen, that could never happen. David, can you comment in terms of the reality of the alternatives? Is that something that the planning board would ever allow based on your familiarity? If those alternatives, I know you guys went through this, so I have to believe the answer would be yes, but if you could just comment on alternatives, especially the ones that are single-family homes.
Pull it up.
Sure.
The first alternative that Glenn talked about was an R15 conventional subdivision. R15 is the existing zoning. Each lot there is at least 15,000 square feet in size, and he's showing 30 homes. I think the likelihood of that property being developed with a 30-home conventional R15 subdivision is very low. I think the likelihood would be that the planning board would, if it were to approve something on that property in accordance with existing zoning, would require the cluster and the preservation of that open meadow. So this cluster that Glenn is showing up here is his version of how the units would be clustered. I don't think it's the planning board's version of how the units would be clustered. I think it would be much more compact. It would be more of a buffer around the outside, including the preservation of the meadow along Covington Road. This is a cluster of detached units. The planning board might require this to be 30 townhouses or something like that. Very compact, with lots of open space around the outside and along Covington Road.
So the so even the multifamily, the townhouses weren't done with the R15 zoning, is that right?
The planning board didn't design any, the planning board didn't design any of these.
I understand. The planning board didn't design any of these. I'm just saying the alternatives that Glenn included in the DEIS. I believe there were a couple of them that were townhouses.
Yes.
But I don't think either of those townhouses were within the current zoning, right? MF.
This is a townhouse.
Right, and so it's the MF zone, another existing zone in the town, but not one that is how this property is currently zoned.
Right. Property
So-
is currently zoned R15.
Right.
And alternatives A and B have that zone.
So that wasn't something that the planning board required or requested, was, well, a realistic look at how we might approve this in its current zoning would be if they were clustered in a townhouse formation. That didn't happen.
No, that hasn't happened yet.
Hasn't happened yet.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
What David was suggesting is that the reality, if the planning board were to approve something that with the current zoning, it wouldn't likely approve the alternatives that you have here as they are laid out on the property. It would more likely be in a clustered situation with the R15 zoning, and it would look more like townhouses.
Glenn, could you show alternative B, please?
Yeah, you're good. Keep going. There. Is that it?
Yes.
Right there.
This is it. So alternative A is the conventional at R15. This is alternative B, which has,
Just wanted to start from the start.
Thanks.
Beginning. Go
Thanks.
back
That's
to
A.
This is alternative A. This has 30 dwelling units.
Right.
Alternative B
Can you
is,
flip to B, please, Glenn? Thank you.
is a cluster. This has 35 dwelling units. The reason being, this has a certain affordable component. It presumably has in the range of 5 affordable dwelling units. These homes are spread throughout the site. I think it's unlikely the planning board would approve a cluster with dwelling units spread out across the site like this. I think it's much more likely that if the property would be developed, it would be developed with townhouses, and you'd have 35 townhouses in the central portion of the site, more or less where Glenn has shown his large building.
I think it's a much more difficult answer than that. In this setting, this whole area is not built on. You can see the outline right there, not built on. And that's because there's the rock ledge that is currently treed. These areas that have the red border, those are stands of trees that exist on the site. And in every instance here, they would all be scraped off in order to build these roads and put it, because there's a right-of-way that goes along these roads with utilities in it. So all of that would get scraped. We started this with the notion of trying to maximize green space, period. Because we felt that it would be the most pleasant and appealing solution to the neighbors, period.
And Glenn, I don't think
And then-
anybody would argue with you on that.
Okay.
I'm sure
So-
everybody's very appreciative of your efforts to maintain as much green space and as much,
But the other
Yeah.
thing, let me just add, nobody, the cost of putting in all of these roads through rock and infrastructure would outweigh the profitability of doing something like that.
This layout, as you can see on the right-hand side, has lots that are typically 15,000 square feet in size. This is a version of a cluster, but it's unusual that if the zone requires lots that are 15,000 square feet in size, that the cluster would have lots that are 15,000 square feet in size. Alternative B, which is the R15 cluster, has dwelling units, homes, across the entire property.
right?
It's unlikely that the planning board would approve it.
That's what I wanted to understand. And I guess my other question is, based on some of the other alternatives that you presented, Glenn, that look almost reasonable, and I can't remember if they were F, G, H, somewhere in that range, the multifamily and the townhouse versions, it looks so similar, yet you're saying,
Is this the one you're thinking?
no, back one and then forward two probably.
Two more?
No, back one, yeah. So,
That's the same as ours,
well, that's the same as yours.
more or less.
Well,
It's
what does
exactly
that
the
mean,
same
more or less?
exact same footprint as ours.
Same footprint, but you're saying it's the same footprint, but it has a greater impact on the environment. Why?
No, I'm not saying that. That's the exact same footprint as ours. It's just using the MF zone at 8 per acre, it's just to see what it looks like.
Okay.
That's all.
Can you go forward two then?
This way?
Yep, keep going.
Go back.
Maybe back to two. Keep going back. Okay, that one. Okay, right there.
The same thing.
Okay, but when you were making the presentation, I thought you said this had a greater impact on the environment, on traffic, on...
Well, this is the same footprint as ours. So if you're now going to other solutions,
Yeah.
like small lot single family, which this is, clustered. This is conventional R5. So these are single family homes.
But wait, I'm not looking at those. I wasn't asking to look at those.
Okay.
I was asking to look at the other alternatives that were presented, which you were on.
Let's walk through them all.
So
Let's
these
start.
Were smaller
The two that you're
footprint, not
The two
smaller
you're-
footprint.
The two you're focusing on are EA and FA.
Okay,
Those are the same layouts as Glenn's.
right, but they're smaller. They're not as many units.
EA has 150 dwelling units,
Right,
and FA has 160 dwelling units.
right, and that's total, so it's fewer affordable, but it's ultimately fewer total. There's considerably less traffic.
No, there's not considerably less traffic. There's not considerably less traffic.
Right, 188 down to 160, or 188 down to 150, or is that right? Proportional. It's proportional, so it's less, it's proportionally less traffic. It's still traffic per dwelling unit, but it's less traffic overall in the neighborhood.
And as would 50 units be less traffic too. Yes, the smaller the project, the fewer less traffic, absolutely.
Right, but it also
Bigger the
had,
project, more traffic.
but it also had less of an impact on the school district, for example, by,
Probably would be two children less.
I think it was more than that.
No, it'd be about two
I don't
children
know, I
less.
gotta open up to my
Because
handy dandy
our project at
fold out.
188 is about 25.
It was
so
20,
if
right,
you
so
knock
you said
it
22
down-
to 25, and it was what,
So if you-
14 to 22. I had it open to there, and now I've lost it, so I can't find my little fold out, happy fold out comparison chart.
So 150 over 188 is about 88%.
But just in terms of what's identified in the DEIS, there was actually a percent, here it is. I'm sorry, I think I got it right here. Okay, so you have, it says, for the alternative E, which is 150 multifamily units, 14 school children versus 22 to 29. 17 under the townhouse, 14 under the multifamily option.
The question is, I'm sorry?
I'm just saying it has.
The fewer units will be a reduction.
So what I
a
was just trying-
proportionate reduction.
What I was just trying to clarify, because you said it was the same footprint, but then it also says in the chart, there's more disturbance than proposed project. It says that there's, and you said that in their presentation as well, you said that there was actually, it had a greater impact on the environment, and I believe that it says that as well. And I don't understand why it would have a greater impact on the environment if, like you just said, it's the same footprint, just smaller.
No, I walked you through each one of the projects. And the projects that are either townhouse, small lot single family, or large lot single family, if that were the approach that a builder would take, all of those are highly evasive on the site, and all of those are tax negative. If we're going to use the footprint of our building and do fewer numbers of units, the open space remains the same, proportionate number of students and traffic would reduce proportionately. But as a project reduces in numbers, the cost of having, let's say, a fitness instructor or concierge has to be amortized over more units. This is to be marketed as a highly serviced project to an empty nester who's going to be more discriminating than somebody coming out of college. So they're going to want a higher level of services, the spa, the yoga studio, all these other things. And if all of a sudden if you had 200 units versus 100 units, the staff has to be amortized over fewer units the smaller the project goes. And so it either comes out of one of two ways. Either you have to strip away the services in order to maintain a certain rent point, because you can only push rent so far. A person will only pay so much. And as you strip away units, you put more pressure on the ability to offer the amenities. That's the issue here.
Okay. So to that point, I think you had mentioned just earlier when Karen was asking questions, Councilwoman DeTore was asking a question about market studies.
Mm-hmm.
What can you share your market studies with us? Because right now I know that we're already hearing, even in the village, there's another proposed high-end rental development application before the village board as well. And since we have two rather new developments of this nature, how do we know that there's such demand for this in Ossining? And I think having a better understanding for us of where you're drawing people from and how it serves us as a community, why we would need high-end rentals, especially with these ultra amenitized services or whatever you're referring to. Like I think we need an understanding of that and why that's really what makes sense for Ossining. Because again, why would we want to change the zoning there if it didn't really make sense for our community? So understanding that your great concern for the environment, I think, is very much appreciated by our board. And looking to really reduce the impacts of traffic, I have to believe would be appreciated by the entire community, because again, that's something that's people complain about even now, the current intersections and the current traffic. Without an extra 188 units something people already have to deal with on a daily basis. So having this added, you know, great number of units suddenly into the neighborhood, even though it's conceivably possible that we could have all those single-family homes, which would have a greater impact on the school district, and I don't think anybody could argue with that. I don't know if the planning board would ever approve that for just those reasons, and I don't know if, you know, I don't necessarily know that that would be an improvement over the current nature of just having nothing there, except for the tax base. But again, it's a balancing act, because you get more kids, more impact, and if you can't offset it, like you're saying, this has the potential to do. But in those alternatives that you've presented, it does seem that there are a couple of other alternatives that look not so bad on paper, which is a reduced size of your proposal. And while it may not be great, you may have to figure out how to make it profitable, I don't necessarily know that that reduced size would be, from our board perspective, much worse. It might be from your board perspective or your pocket's perspective, but it wouldn't necessarily be so for us as from a community perspective, because it looks good on paper. I mean, it looks a lot better. It's a lot fewer students, it's fewer, it's a lot, it's, you know, reduced traffic from 96 a.m. and 121 p.m. peak trips to 77 a.m. and 100 peak trips. I mean, that's, you know, kind of a percentage. That's significant. That's almost 25% reduction. You know, those are kind of significant. And that's significant when you look at that size. So to me, like, you've actually put an option in here that looks a lot better than yours, except that you don't include the community benefit, which I'm not sure why you wouldn't. You know, it seems to me like you would still include some community benefit. Maybe it would be smaller, but I'm confident that you would, Glenn. And you know, I just think that it's something to consider.
You've asked a lot of questions. You've asked about the market study, and I hear you. This is an expensive project. 10% of the units, as we propose at 19, a lot of units are to be affordable, and those units lose money, a lot of money. So those units get amortized over all of the others. This project has a garage, which, not taking anything away from the Avalon, doesn't have a garage, much more expensive to build. It has elevators, not taking anything away from the Avalon, doesn't have elevators, costs more to build. Has a much higher level amenity package to appeal specifically to an empty nester. And when you get down to a certain number, so let's just use 150. It's not 150 from my perspective, it's 135 from my perspective, because 10% of those are affordable. And I just know sitting here, when you get down to a number like that of 135, and you're trying to build elevators and trying to do garage parking and offer spas for dogs and all these other things, and in a site that's got some expensive roads because they curl around, although albeit using the existing paths of the existing roads more or less, gets to be expensive, and the quality of that architecture is very high. Those overhangs, those timbers, all of that costs a lot of money. And I want to build a quality project, and I don't want to get down to a small size where I'm being forced to strip away and make it look cheap. That's the issue.
I mean, I'm
You
just
want a cheap-looking project?
Glenn, I think what would be helpful, and you mentioned before that you have, I mean, obviously you wouldn't build any project if you didn't think you had the market for it. I think it would really be helpful for us to have whatever market data you have that guided you towards this particular project in the design, so that we understand the demographics too. There is a bit of concern, whether, even though this is in the town, we have another 188 units that are presumably coming online in the village. That's a lot of units here, and the rents are going to be high. High for many people who live here. So I think we would really want to understand what's driving the demographics from the market perspective. So you must have some data that shows that the market will bear this, and we would just really be interested in seeing that.
Sure. You know, my mind is spinning as to how to present that. I think that one of the things that we all have to remember is that a lot of the housing stock in this town is, what, 80, 90, 100 years old? And that stuff was built with tiny little closets, galley kitchens that are defunct today, potentially no parking. And that's not the way people want to live anymore. I'm sorry, am I hiding over here?
No, I have a bad neck, and I just really don't feel like cleaning it, so if you wouldn't mind just...
And people just don't want to live that way anymore. You go in, I mean, I don't know how any of you get into New York and into Brooklyn, to Dumbo, to Long Island City, to the coastline in New Jersey, whether it be Fort Lee or West New York or Weehawken or Hoboken, and people live differently today. Millennials is not a millennial product, but it's what's coming. They're looking for highly amenitized, easy service, and we see that, and we see that also with empty nesters. And you know, the baby boomers are the current empty nesters, but the Gen X's are coming up quickly, and people are more and more looking for high level of service, but you know, not having to pull leaves out of gutters and plow their roads and sidewalks and all of that. It's the trend. And a lot of it is, and I hate to sound like I'm preaching, I apologize. You know, the pedestrian style garden apartment of the 50s and 60s was pretty basic and kind of a post-war solution, but apartment living today is totally different. Architecturally, it can be very striking with interesting lobbies and corridors and interesting units and all of this. And so it's much more appealing today. And that's what's happening around the world, around this country for sure.
I do have one more question about style. I actually happen to love the Adirondack style that you presented.
You like it?
But I'm just curious because it doesn't necessarily seem Hudson Valley-ish. I'm wondering, you kept mentioning Hudson. Well, the Hudson, I know it starts up like here in the clouds, the Adirondacks, but that's a little bit different than down here in the Hudson Valley. So I just wanted to have an understanding of why you think that's Hudson Valley architecture.
You're the
And
first person to ask that, for sure. There's lots of this in the Hudson Valley. You know, I don't know the answer to that, Dana. But irrespective, we like it. We think it's attractive.
Okay, that's what I think is the real answer, is that we like it. I like it, you know, I like this kind of architecture versus that it fits in with the area architecture. That's all. I guess that's really what I'm asking. Is it just that you like it?
What we didn't want to do is I hate to use the word colonial, but there are a lot of examples that are more traditional, and we didn't want that. We felt that would not be. You've seen it. You've been there, done it. I mean, there are other projects around that are like that. They're not particularly striking. We think this would be a beautiful addition, and that's what we thought, and everybody seems to have liked it that we've shown it to. So. One thing I don't want to get into is a shred on design. God,
no, that's okay. I just wanted to have an understanding of why you thought that particular architecture fit in with the community character, the character of the community. You refer to it under that heading, I think, a number of times in the EIS, and I just really didn't quite understand it. So that was all. Okay, let me just see if there were any other questions that I had.
All right, again with the traffic. Why would the proposed project with 188 units have only 96 AM trips, whereas 30 family houses would have 31 AM trips?
Mark has.
Yeah, that's why I'm looking at him. You know, the alternatives assume that, you know, one person from each household goes out, and this is half the people, so.
So the trips that are shown in the TIS are all taken off of standard traffic information industry publication, which is actually the traffic trip generation manual. It's put out by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. Sorry, it's based on numbers of similar facilities around the country using existing facilities as backup related to those trip generations you see in those tables. You will get less traffic with the houses because there was less, I believe is what you were mentioning.
Well, no, I'm just saying the houses are one-to-one. There's one house, there's one person
Yep.
at least taking a trip.
Yep.
Here, for every 2 units, there's one person taking a trip.
Correct.
Feels
Basically, you also don't have everyone leaving all at the same time. So maybe people at houses have 2 cars potentially. You might not all leave at the same peak hour. So people might be leaving a little bit earlier, people might be leaving a little bit later. But these calculations are based on actual existing facilities. So there is backup to those numbers as why they cannot to be like.
Okay, do you have the actual wait time at the light at Kitchewan Road? From coming in at Kitchewan Road onto 9A?
So you're talking about from Croton Road onto 9A?
From that turn at Kitchewan, there's usually a line of people waiting to turn. And I know that your proposal addresses that, but do you have an estimate of what the current wait time is and what the proposed wait time would be with the improvements?
Yep. I don't have those numbers specifically, but the traffic study does study that intersection, and the average vehicle delay, which is actually what the levels of service are based on, are in there, and it's analyzed for the existing, the no build, and the build for all 3 of those peak hours that we're not listed in the study.
Okay, I didn't notice that in here. Is it in here?
For the proposed development.
Right. Sorry. It's right in front of me.
It actually might be in the appendix, and not this particular one.
Oh, okay. Okay, I would love to see
It
that.
looks like this.
So you know, it's on the disc. Right. It's on the disc, okay.
The other thing you have to remember is this is more than half one-bedroom units. So just by design, it will have, maybe just a single occupant people in those with one car, and then the balance are 2-bedroom units. So we have no threes. Threes are the ones that generate children. I believe at peak hours, this project throws off 1 car for every minute and a half coming out of the driveway onto Croton Dam Road at peak hours. And peak for this is like around 7:30 to 8:30 weekday mornings. Evening is spread out over a wider bandwidth of hours, and then the weekend there's no kids commuting to school or people commuting to work, so the traffic is spread out over a much wider area, so there really is no peak conditions that you would realize as you would during the weekday.
Is it possible to get a copy of the NICE, DOT response? I don't think
Yes.
this is in the response.
Dan, this document was sent to the DOT, so we're hoping for comments back regarding the draft environmental impact statement. But if you do have anything in writing, it would be good to submit.
Right, because it was referred to and
New York State Department of Transportation has a three-stage process related to improvements on their roadways. Stage 1 is more of a conceptual review where they look at the traffic studies and initial proposals. That has been submitted to the DOT, and we received comments back from that on our submission to them. The traffic study is exactly the traffic study that you were seeing in your book. Stage 2 is more the design of the construction drawings for those improvements that are approved and conceptually approved in stage 1. And stage 3 is a lot of just the paperwork and insurances and bonding. So we submitted the stage 1, they are satisfied with what was shown in there, and they're allowing us to go to stage 2. We do have email correspondence from them related to that if it isn't provided, we definitely can provide that as well.
One other question, Glenn, you had mentioned something about parking spaces, and you said this sort of like overbuilt in terms of parking spaces.
Yeah, the trend, and it's being experienced, you know, again, we have projects and friends with projects and that have been built in the last 5 years, and all of them are experiencing a lot of extra parking spaces because, you know, the obvious trends. Uber is so easy, and others like it, and ride sharing is coming on with abandon.
So is that requirement of parking spaces coming from us, or is that just, I mean, like, why would you have that many parking spaces?
Well, it was designed, you know, we started this 3 years ago, and it was part of the process. We should rethink it.
Okay. That's what I'm asking.
And it's a moving target, you know, the ride sharing thing has come on so quickly, and then the autonomous car, I mean, people in here probably know more about it than I do. But, you know, the example I use is the one-car family. The spouse goes to the train station in the morning, the car goes back to the house automatically, and that person uses it during the day. That's happening.
Well, we did apply for a grant for an autonomous trolley.
Seriously?
Yes. We didn't get it, but we're going to try it. we're not done with it yet. Okay, I might have had just a couple more questions. I just want to double check has the Environmental Advisory Committee weighed in yet on any of this to you in terms of wetlands disturbance? Or
I haven't seen anything from them yet, but they did get a copy of the DEIS.
Okay.
Yeah,
also,
we just, so everybody knows, we have a little quarter-acre wetland that sits adjacent to Narragansett, and the project is a great distance away from it. We don't touch the wetland.
The other thing, in the archaeological and historic studies, you really didn't, there wasn't that much information about the house before, when it was a property before, thank you. It was,
Houses?
The houses, or but I meant specifically the 1868 house, the original house that was, you know, taken apart and put back together, but not in such form as it originally was. But I know we had talked about trying to salvage some of the materials from it, see if you could reuse them, and you said it wasn't possible, but...
Well, we've done a full historic analysis, and that was accepted by SHPO. So
right.
The documentation of it's been done. Salvaging some of the materials on its limestone on the front fascia, we could salvage that. I'm sure there'd be some use for it. I don't, relative to the style of what we're proposing, we've not looked into it. I don't really have an answer for that. Would somebody else want it? I don't know that either. But the building itself is got a lot of wood rot. It's been highly altered inside. It's, you know, it's unfortunate.
Great. Okay. Then the other thing was the adverse environmental impacts that cannot be avoided. The removal of 237 trees, the approximate 1.32 acres of impervious surface, or 7.1% increase to impervious surface, was all considered was not considered significant. And I just, David, can you comment on what's significant or what isn't significant? Like, how does that's not considered significant?
It'll ultimately be up to the planning board to determine what's significant and what's not. Can I spend a moment on process?
Sure.
This is the draft environmental impact statement. The word final has been used a couple of times tonight. I think that was used, meaning that this is the final version of the draft environmental impact statement.
Correct.
Tomorrow evening at 7:30, the planning board is going to be holding a public hearing on the draft environmental impact statement at the community center, and obviously everyone from the public is invited. Assuming the public hearing closes tomorrow night, The end of the written comment period will be on April 18th. That's got to be at least 10 days beyond the close of the public hearing. If the public hearing stays open and is adjourned, then the written comment period will be extended. And it's too early to tell about that, obviously. Regarding your question, Dana, the final environmental impact statement that Glenn will be preparing is going to have to respond to all of the substantive comments that come in regarding the draft environmental impact statement. The lack of significant adverse environmental impact is Glenn's point of view. The final environmental impact statement, regardless of who prepares it, will be in the lead agency's voice. That is the planning board's voice. And then following the acceptance of a final environmental impact statement, the planning board will be drafting a finding statement, which is essentially a distillation of the draft and final environmental impact statements. And when you read that, you'll find out what the planning board really thinks about the environmental impacts. Every involved agency, and you're an involved agency because you have the potential to grant an approval here, every involved agency has to adopt a finding statement. So you'll be adopting one as well, presumably, if the process goes that far.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, 'cause other questions that I had were similar about the impacts of the steep slopes and erosion potential. And things
We
like
had a
that.
whole discussion about conclusions in the draft environmental impact statement. There is some language up front which talks about the fact that these are the applicant's conclusions. But the final environmental impact statement, as I said, will be in the planning board's voice, as will its finding statement.
Okay, that's great. Okay, I think that's it for my questions. Are there any other additional questions from any of my council?
Okay, one, I would like to say that Harbor Square does not have enough parking. It's a mess down there. Coming from, I go down there all the time. I don't even think it's a restaurant. It's just many more cars than there were before the project was completed. So I don't know about the
They have a restaurant that's pretty popular.
Yeah, but even when the restaurant's closed, it's a parking problem, so.
The parking requirement in the town zoning law is a very reasonable parking requirement. It's actually...
I mean, is it different compared to the village?
I don't know what the village's is, but the town's is, and this was changed not too long ago, 2 for each dwelling unit plus 1/2 for each bedroom, more than 2 bedrooms. So if it's a 2-bedroom unit, it would be 2 parking spaces. If it's a 3-bedroom unit, it would be 2.5 parking spaces. 4 bedrooms, 3 parking spaces. It's not an excessive amount of parking. There has to be enough parking for the people who live there as well as all of their visitors.
Okay. What I wanted you to ask you to speak about was you said you had a conversation with the school board, and can you expand on that?
Sure. We began 3 years ago, met with board members and the administration, Ray Sanchez, and their consultants and our consultants, and began this dialogue as to what we're proposing. We gave them what you've got, more or less, 3 years later. And we went through the 3 methodologies to figure out what the expected children generation would be. And I have my own personal experience from other projects I've done. My personal experience is it's always been less than the projections. It sounds self-serving, but that's been the reality, because the people that move into these projects in suburban locations, once their children get to be of school age, they will typically, if they're still renters, they'll move into a rental house so that they have some loan. But nevertheless, in this case, we started with the Rutgers methodology, and these 2 professors, and David knows this methodology well, that the school district uses when they do their own forward forecasting in terms of kids and needs for space growth. So we started with that, and we told them the number of 1-bedroom units, number of 2-bedroom units, used their factors, and came up with the number, I think it's 25, 26. Bay Area economics has a similar set of factors, come at it a little bit differently.
Now, I understand that where you got the number of how many kids you think will be added to the district. My understanding is that our district is basically at capacity or beyond capacity at this point. Now, I'd like to understand what the school district, how that conversation went, like we're full. How do you plan to mitigate that problem?
Well, that's where we got into, we have a signed agreement. It was just renewed this past week, where we will make direct payments to the district as our, it's not mitigation, it's viewed as mitigation, but so they can build as they see fit, renovate areas that may not be classrooms into classrooms, which they've done in the past. You have, what, 6 school buildings in the district? So you'd have to ask Ray Sanchez and the board.
I'll ask Ray. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I will use it.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation and answering all of our questions. I'm sure there will be more in the additional conversation over time, but we appreciate, again, all the work that's gone into this, and that you like our community so much. Okay, so we are going to move on to talk a little bit about ground-mounted solar legislation, and in general solar legislation, because we don't have any in place really here in the town. And we're hoping that David is going to lead us a little bit, but I need to take a 2-minute break for water. So I'm going to take a water break, and we will be back in 2 minutes. So we're going to move things around a little bit on the agenda, and instead of continuing with our work session, I'd like a motion to, I'm sorry, no, we're going to continue with our work session, I was joking, but we're just going to move to item 4 on the agenda to discuss the Westchester Ballroom Cabaret license conditions. So we can have a little bit of a discussion about some of the conditions that at our last meeting, we were preparing to discuss and adopt a resolution granting cabaret license to Westchester Ballroom with specific conditions, but there were comments from both Westchester Ballroom as well as the neighboring community, and as such we decided to table the resolution and have further discussion at the meeting this evening. So I would ask our counsel, Christy Tamadana, if she could just take us through some of the changes to the conditions that are included in the cabaret license for Westchester Ballroom since the last time that we spoke, and if there's anything else that you wanted to mention besides that, feel free.
Okay, so yeah, there were a bunch of comments.
I can't hear you. I don't know if something in your microphone's on.
It's okay.
Okay.
There were several comments that were received during the public comment on agenda items last week, and so the board decided to take another crack at it and try to revise it a little bit further, both to address some issues that were raised by the applicant as well as members of the public. And I will just go through what changes were made. The first is in paragraph 2 of the findings, and that's just to clarify that the applicant did originally make the application on October 31st, 2017, and that it was subsequently amended and supplemented. In finding number 8, there was a comment made by the public indicating that they thought it should be clear in this paragraph that all parties would include, that all activities and events would include dance instruction. However, because this is a recitation of what was in the applicant's application, I was trying to mirror the language that was used by the applicant, and so I didn't make that change, but I did indicate at the bottom of that paragraph, because it was in the application, that the applicant stated that the parties would include dance instruction from a Westchester Ballroom dance instructor. There were some comments made regarding having DJs and bands sign a statement and the frequency with which those statements should be made. There was some suggestion that they be made once a month, excuse me. After some discussion with the board, it was revised to say that they have to be updated annually, but that can certainly be a subject of discussion here tonight. Paragraph 4, the applicant shall prohibit DJs, we added, and bands from using their own sound equipment. Paragraph 6 was revised, and this goes in conjunction, I guess skipping ahead to paragraph 11, there had been a requirement that was included at the suggestion of the building inspector that the applicant shall provide the supervisor's office with the names and contact information of all dance instructors employed by the applicant, and the applicant shall update the list accordingly. Based upon comments that were made by the applicant's counsel at the last meeting regarding privacy concerns and the scope of the conditions and what they were desired to achieve, paragraph 11 was omitted, and paragraph 6 was amended to state that the applicant shall ensure that a trained and qualified dance instructor is present for and providing instruction at all events. Paragraph 7 was amended, and this was based upon a discussion I had had with the applicant's counsel, as well as comments that were made by the public at the last meeting. Just to clarify that the goal with this subsequent testing is when what we've identified as these Saturday night type of events that can be somewhat more louder or larger, tend to create, or what the board has heard in the past could potentially create certain noise impacts. Because they aren't happening right now, the board wasn't able to have any testing done with respect to those and consider what, if any, impacts from them exist prior to potentially or considering the grant of this license. But prior to holding the first of those events at the beginning or coming months, whenever that may occur, there will be testing that is done in conjunction with the police department, and that the residents of Morningside Drive will be notified of that and allowed to be present if they desire to do so. There was an indication that Mr. Streeter is no longer involved in the business, and so he was removed from notification. And then in what used to be paragraph 13 and is now paragraph 12, there had been a comment from the public about whether certain violations or creating more definitive and absolute circumstances under which some sort of violation would lead to a revocation of the license. However, there is a specific code provision in the license, in the cabaret code, that deals specifically with revocation, and violation under no circumstances is enough. It has to result in a conviction. And that's just a matter of due process, because in reality, anyone can call up and say, they're being noisy or they're violating the code. But then to just revoke anyone's license based upon that statement, unless there's been certain due process that's followed and certain evidentiary standards that have been met, when the board had adopted that provision, it was the understanding that there needed to be some more oversight in order to get to that point. So I believe the code says that there has to be at least 2 violations within a 6-month period in order for revocation of a license for failure to comply with conditions to be a possibility. If the board wanted to reconsider that with respect to the cabaret code as it applies to all applications going forward, that's something you could do, but the way the code reads now, that's not really practical or in compliance with the code to do that. And so what I did do is I added that it would be revoked in accordance with Town Code Section 6810, just to incorporate the way the code currently reads. Something else that was just brought to my attention is in paragraph 8, and that says that if the police are, at the end of the paragraph, if the police are called as a result of a noise disturbance immediately after being notified by the police, the sound level shall be reduced and shall not be increased during the remainder of the event class activity. And so I haven't looked, I may have it on me actually, if I want to start rummaging around right now. My recollection is that this is a straight carryover in language from last year's. However, the applicant's position is that it should really be up to the police to determine whether the music needs to be lowered, because as I said before, the reality is that anyone could pretty much call and say they're being too loud, but it should really be up to the police when they show up at the site to determine whether that is actually the case and whether the music does in fact need to be lowered. So because that wasn't brought up earlier, I was not able to review it earlier and put it in the resolution, so this board may want to consider that now. And I am looking at last year's resolution granting the license, and it was paragraph 4, if the police are called as a result of a noise disturbance immediately after being notified by police, the sound level shall be reduced and shall not be increased during the remainder of the activity. So it is a carryover from last year, but it was raised as something that you may want to potentially consider changing. And so if the board wants to consider that or any of the other items I've just discussed, you're more than welcome.
Okay, so I don't know if anybody has any things that you want to discuss. So maybe the only thing that I would suggest is that I think that it actually is accounted for in that paragraph, because it says immediately after being notified by the police. So in other words, it's if the police are called as a result of noise disturbance, immediately after being notified by the police. So again, the police have the option to notify or not notify. They don't necessarily notify the applicant upon the call.
I see what you're saying.
Right? So I think it's when the police notify them that they need to lower their volume, then they need to lower their volume. And not turn it up again.
Okay, so
I mean, it could be that you could clarify the language a tiny bit to make it clearer that upon notification, that the Westchester Ballroom, upon notification by the police that the sound is too loud, they need to reduce it.
So yeah, okay, if
Something like that.
if the police are called as a result of a noise disturbance,
And the police determine that the sound level should be lowered then, or something like that. I'm fine with that. Also, in paragraph 7, just because I thought we had done this already, but it says prior to holding its first Saturday night event. And I think we should say Saturday night type of event. We might have to define that. Again, because we heard from the neighbors that sometimes events happen on a Friday night. So we're not necessarily waiting for an event on a Saturday night. If there's an event that's like a Saturday night-like event that happens on a Friday night, we can do the sound check on a Friday night.
it does say in parentheses after that, as discussed in paragraph 6 of the findings above.
Okay, oh, you know what, I was looking at the wrong paragraph 6, that's probably why. Friday night
The town board
event.
determines there are different events that are typically held on Saturdays that can be louder and or larger and potentially cause disturbance in the neighbors.
Right, so just, if we could just say Saturday night type of event in paragraph 7 of the,
Okay.
okay.
Whether,
conditions.
and then
The conditions.
Saturday night type of event, as discussed in paragraph 6 of the findings above,
Mhm.
whether that is held in May or earlier, and regardless of the actual day of the week of the event.
Yeah, perfect. And then the only other thing that we were talking about was in paragraph 3 of the conditions, we were talking about this annual statement. I thought we had talked about more frequent than that, but not as frequent as quarterly, as monthly. So, possibly it could just include when requested by the board, or at least annually, something like that. So, when we request to get copies of the statements. In other words, they're saying that they're going to have the DJs and band sign off, that they understand that they can't use this other equipment and that the sound has to be, such and such a level, but we don't need to see those things that have been signed off on every month. We could see them when we request them at our request or at least annually.
Well, the way this is drafted, they have to be submitted annually, and every time they're signed, they're automatically to be provided to the town supervisor's office.
Oh, okay. Okay, I'm fine. I
missed that. When you were saying it before, you were saying it was, however, whenever you read it,
Well, I
I
mean-
it's just once, I thought it was just once a year.
Well,
That's fine.
it's once a year that,
But we get copies of it, that they have to re-up.
exactly.
That's
It was
fine.
more just, as opposed to having them
Sure.
sign once a month,
Yeah.
these same documents over and over again. And because they are back here annually, it seems that this was
That's fine.
a way to handle it, and you can always revisit it going forward.
So thank you. Is there any other discussion? Is everybody okay with this? Okay, in that case, I am now going to take a motion to move into our special meeting for a brief time, and then we will move back out of our special meeting back into work session. Do we have a motion? So that was Councilwoman Shaw and Councilwoman Feldman for moved and seconded.
Whereas on or about December 15, 2017, Ballroom Studio of Westchester applied for a renewal of its cabaret license pursuant to Chapter 68 of the Town Code. And whereas the Town Board opened a public hearing on the license renewal application at its January 23, 2018 meeting and continued the hearing at its meetings held on February 27, 2018 and March 13, 2018. And whereas after hearing from the public and town officials and obtaining supplemental information from the applicant, the board closed the public hearing at its March 13, 2018 meeting. Now therefore be it resolved, the town board hereby grants the applicant a conditional cabaret license for the calendar year 2018 in the form annexed here too.
Can we just back up, because don't we have to do the roll call first? For the, I'm sorry.
Councilman Feldman.
Aye.
Councilman Wiltshire.
Aye.
Councilwoman Totori. Councilwoman Shaw. Supervisor Lundberg.
Here. Thank you.
Okay, ready to begin?
And again, before we consider this board resolution, before I even take a motion, I just want to ask for if there's any public comment on any agenda items. And this is the only agenda item. So is there any public comment on this item? Yes? Okay. Could you just come up? Could you just grab a microphone?
I'm a cancer survivor.
Okay. Could
Three
you just
times.
you have to just state your name and your address, please? Okay.
My name is Donna Walsh, and I live at 11 Meadow Road in Montrose, New York. I was referred to the studio because I was very weak from radiation and chemo 3 times in 5 years. I had to, they recommended dance as an exercise. So I went to Connecticut. I went up to Poughkeepsie, hours traveling. I found this place. Look at me, I'm vertical. I'm as healthy as can be. Barbara Antes is giving a benefit for cancer support, which I have personally benefited from financially and emotionally and physically. She's raising thousands of dollars. Her charity work for the victims of the hurricane in Puerto Rico. Because while Cornell has dance therapy, where I am a patient, Barbara has instituted dance therapy for special needs individuals. You have no idea how it changes a person's life who cannot move, who finds that they can. The reduction in pain because of mental stimulation. I'm also arthritic. Do you know it? I couldn't move this. Her instructors have me. I've met friends there. I had no need to come into Osling for anything. I met friends there before and after. We have a bite to eat in restaurants I didn't know existed. You know, up and down North State, go here and go there. She brings in business to the other places because almost everybody who goes there goes for a bite somewhere. So you're benefiting the restaurants. I don't know, I'd have to travel into Manhattan or to Greenwich, Connecticut to get the same services that I have right here. And I didn't even know it existed. It's a fabulous place. And I'm stronger now because of Miss Antiques than I was a year ago.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. If you, could you just hand it back to the microphone? Oh,
May I?
okay, sure. Evangelina.
And she brings people up from the city to do this instructing.
I'm Evangelina Rivera, and I live here in Ossining, and I'm a dance instructor at Westchester Ballroom. And last Saturday, we had a gathering with a lot of the neighbors and the Westchester Ballroom. I made frittata. I never cook, but I made frittata. And we had a really nice exchange. I think it was a very positive exchange, and we were trying to find solutions together as to how we can make the sound better and not. And so together we were working, and I really thought it was a positive exchange. Also, they took our numbers so that they will call us first before they call the authorities. And if there's something, any problem, they'll call us. And I think we're going to have wine and cheese with them sometime soon to keep dialogue going with them and to do more community outreach. We have decided we're going to do things together. So I really do think it was a positive moment. Okay.
Great.
And if everyone wants frittata.
Thanks so much, and we appreciate the outreach, and thanks for the testimonial as well. Okay, so we have a resolution that has been read by Ms. Zahach, and if we could have a motion for the resolution granting a cabaret license renewal to Ballroom Studio Westchester, unless there's any further discussion with the board members.
I'm happy to hear that so moved, or second.
Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Abstentions? Thank you so much. Your cabaret license is granted.
Yippee! Thank you.
Okay, now can I please have a motion to go back into our work session for further discussion? Okay. All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Great. Thank you very much. Have a great day. And now we're going to go and talk a little bit about solar legislation. Mr. Stallman, could you bring us up to speed a little bit on what's been going on around the county and maybe some suggestions for where you think we should be? We had heard from our building inspector that he's been receiving more either inquiries or applications for ground-mounted solar, and he thinks because we have no guidance, he's either had to turn people away because they're looking for some kind of a commercial-sized solar installation, and they're not in a commercial district. Send them to the zoning board, or just shrug his shoulders. So we want to give him some guidance. We think that we should be giving him some guidance. I know that other communities have adopted the municipal solar code. There's some standard applications, and there's some other standards that are out there right now in communities that are our neighbors. So if you could just give us a little guidance as to where you think we maybe should be considering going, and what kind of things the board could weigh in on, so we could maybe come up with something to adopt in the near future.
Sure. I think you just said, Dana, that more and more communities are adopting solar regulations, and every few years seems to be a new use, and it's unaccounted for in certain communities, and it's unaccounted for here in the town of Ossining. So I think you really do need provisions in the zoning law regarding solar, ground-mounted solar. Except for solar farms, a ground-mounted solar panel in the residential zoning districts or the commercial zoning districts for that purpose would be an accessory use. It would be accessory to the principal use of the property. And right now, I'm not sure exactly what John does. You kind of described what he may be doing. But I think he's treating solar, ground-mounted solar as an accessory use like a shed. And there are setback requirements for accessory uses like sheds. Sheds are probably the most common accessory structure. fairly small setbacks from the perimeter property lines of the lot. But in this case, we need to cover a variety of things: placement, size, height, screening. I know John recently wrote something where he said that he didn't have the authority, he didn't think, to require screening, and energy capacity. So we need to cover those things with respect to all of the zoning districts in which ground-mounted solar is going to be permitted. And I haven't really given a lot of thought to how to do this in the town of Austining, but we have to cover all of those things for each zoning district in which ground-mounted solar would be permitted. I think the appropriate board to deal with these ground-mounted solar applications would be the ARB, the Architectural Review Board, which, as you know, is the same as the Planning Board. So once we have the provisions in place, people would make application to the ARB, maybe through John Hamilton or through the Planning Board office, or however we do that, and get it before the ARB. The only other kind of solar that's not an accessory use would be a solar farm. And those are generally fairly large areas of solar panels across a property. And I think the town board, need to think about whether those should be permitted and where they should be permitted, if they're going to be allowed. I was just involved with the approval of a solar farm up in the town of Wappinger in southern Dutchess County. And they have specific regulations for solar farms up in that specific community. But these are the things that we need to deal with in drafting provisions. Those two documents that you sent me links to those two documents. They're very basic, but they're worth reading, I think, even though they're very basic. There are references in those documents to other provisions, or I should not say other provisions, but provisions in many local zoning codes. So there's a lot of guidance out there, there are a lot of examples out there, and I think it's just a matter of putting together a local law and getting it before you and then talking about the whole thing. It's not reinventing the wheel, as George Bush said, it's not rocket surgery, so.
Great. So one of the things that I think we need to do as a board is to kind of find a balance, like a happy medium. Because I think on the one hand, we're looking to encourage alternative and sustainable sources of energy production, which solar is. And on the other hand, we don't want it to become a disturbance or an eyesore. But I think that, again, we need to find that balance. And I do think that we do have some spots in the town that might actually be conducive to solar farms, even though they're not going to be on the scale that you might see them upstate. But there might be some spots that would help potentially maintain open space, have a potential to generate solar energy within our borders, and also offer an economic offset, a positive offset for whoever might be able to have that on their current property or sell a piece of their property off for that purpose. So I think that it would be worth, looking at that and considering where in Austin that such would fit, and also looking at the balance between any kind of other environmental offsets. Like I don't necessarily think clear cutting trees to put up solar panels is the best thing to do, because it's again not necessarily the best. So I was hoping that we could find a way to make it easier also for people to put rooftop solar. I couldn't find the rooftop solar in our code to make it sort of easier to get that permitted.
We don't have any reference to rooftop solar.
Right.
There are basically three kinds of solar. One is rooftop, one is ground mounted, and now they're actually using solar building materials to actually integrate
Right.
solar panels into the buildings.
I haven't seen those yet because I've been waiting for those, but as soon as they come out, affordably. But I do think, again, many of us would have to cut down a number of trees, which give us our homes a lot of benefit to be able to have an effective, affordable, and again, economically feasible solar array on our roofs. So I think it's good to find the balance. Again, I'm not going to dictate to other people what they should do, but I think the planning board or the architectural review board, whichever, would have to take those things into consideration. But I think for us to give some guidance would be a good thing so that we could expedite some of these applications so that people could have an easier time putting solar panels on their own homes and have the potential to, wherever it makes sense to do so, put any kind of ground mounted in with, again, whatever the landscaping or the screening appropriate to the location and to the neighbors, considerate of the neighbors. Does anybody have anything else that they want to say about it?
You can.
John, last week, was it last week he was in? He stated that the panels, I don't think he mentioned it. Those, what does,
Oh, the roof?
no, the putting on your property in the pole.
The ground mounted.
Okay, ground mount. But what he did talk about was the people wanting to put them in their yards on the ground. And he was thinking that would cause a problem with some of the neighbors because they have to be a certain height. And what would you suggest that do not put them in your yard if you have neighbors, if you're around neighbors?
I think we have to look at it district by district. Obviously, you're not going to put very large solar panels in Crotonville. There just isn't enough room, and it would be too impactful. But you could put, conceivably, panels on your roof. So I think we've got to look at it district by district and determine what is appropriate in terms of size and height. And there can be screening. Obviously, you don't want to put the screening in a place where it's going to put the solar panels in shade and they're not going to be useful. So we have to sort through it and draft something appropriate.
Okay, thank you.
I thought last year John had said that they had made an expedited application for rooftop solar panels during that whole Solarize Aspen. Am I mistaken?
I don't know what John does, frankly.
Okay.
I'll talk to him and find out.
I thought he mentioned that they had come up with a different process for just the solar panels so that we could get them done a little more quickly.
He might have.
I
I was
believe-
looking through our
yeah.
code to try to find that, and maybe it was someplace else.
Yeah, I think it's in the application process
Okay.
in the building department, if I'm not mistaken, but we can ask him. Yeah, I think we need to really look at the height restrictions, and the visual lines from different properties around. I don't, necessarily want to be staring into solar panels. And I believe someone sent us an email about it being impactful to birds. I don't understand how it is, but I'd like to understand more about that, to how solar panels impact the wildlife around them. I hadn't heard that before.
I brought that, but I did print out Donna's email to us, guys.
Okay, so if we're done with that, then I think that the directive would be if we can have David draw a potential local law. Those are the two words I was looking for. An amendment to our current code. Then we'll have the opportunity to discuss it with public hearings, et cetera, and we can move forward on that. Okay, the next item that we wanted to talk about was currently our town code allows for accessory apartments under a very specific set of conditions. And it has been suggested, most recently by Mr. Hamilton, that the town board may want to consider expanding the list of conditions under which these would be permitted. Our understanding is that the town went through this conversation several years back and it didn't go very far because there was a local group of residents who were opposed to it for a variety of reasons. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't reevaluate if it does make sense, and at a time when people are looking for more and more opportunities to age in place, to maybe stay under one roof if you're an adult child and can't afford to go out on your own. There might be some other conditions that we want to consider for accessory apartments in the town. So without further ado, Mr. Stallman, could you just take us back a little bit and give us a little bit of a summary of what has gone on in the past with this?
So back in 2012, the town board was entertaining a local law that essentially did two things. It took the accessory apartment regulations, which are in Chapter 50 of the town code, and moved them into the zoning law so that the zoning board of appeals could issue a variance with respect to the provisions of the accessory apartment regulations. The other thing that local law back in 2012 did is it allowed accessory apartments in detached accessory structures on a property. Right now, you can only have an accessory apartment in the principal building, in the home. If you've got a garage with an area above the garage that's suitable for an accessory apartment, it can't be used as an accessory apartment. And by virtue of the regulations not being in the zoning law, the zoning board of appeals can't grant variances with respect to any of the provisions relating to accessory apartments. So there were only two things that were being entertained in that local law at the time. And there was a small but vocal group of citizens who didn't want either of those two things to happen. And there was some relatively outlandish and fanciful thoughts as to how this would end up. I guess I can somehow got into motorcycle gangs and drug addicts. Occupying the accessory apartments in these detached structures, like above a garage. Toward the end of the process, we started talking about making a provision, a requirement, such that the accessory apartment or the main part of the house would have to be lived in by a relative, a close relative. So that came up, and then the whole thing was abandoned. And I think in John Hamilton's recent email, he talked about the two initial things I mentioned, taking it out of or repealing Chapter 50, getting rid of Chapter 50, putting the provisions in the zoning law, and secondly, having accessory apartments be allowed in detached structures on the property.
I'm going to turn it over to my board colleagues to comment at all on your interest in taking this subject up again.
I think it's important to take it up again because, as Glenn said, over the last several years, there's been dramatic changes in how people like to live, and the trends have changed somewhat significantly. So, in terms of who lives in any structure, the same, the same rules that apply to apartments would essentially apply to an accessory apartment. It's an apartment, so, or any kind of rental apartments. One of the things that, while I think that the presentation on River and Lowell makes a lot of sense in terms of people wanting to, the way people may want to live. The reality is those apartments are expensive, and not everybody is necessarily going to be able to accommodate that, whether they want to live that way or not. One way, particularly for people who are aging and want to age in place, is to have an accessory apartment can really provide a tremendous value to somebody by offsetting their expenses and allowing them to have somebody nearby that could potentially be helpful in some way. The other thing is we have an issue of affordability. We have a crisis of affordability. It's a national crisis. It's a crisis in our community. And accessory apartments can be an affordable option. And some municipalities, and I can't remember which ones, have adopted accessory apartment policies so that if somebody creates an accessory apartment and it's rented at a certain income level or a certain level of affordability, they get some sort of incentive for doing that. And then, in some municipalities, they've actually like limited the number of accessible apartments, you know, to like 50 and it's first come first serve, or what, you know. So there's different ways of doing this, but these are things that a lot of municipalities are looking into now, and it does provide. You know, again, a way for people to age in place, a way for people to offset the skyrocketing cost of housing, and you know, I think we should look at this more broadly because I think it offers solutions for the way people want to live forward that we haven't really fully explored, that maybe weren't as apparent in 2012, I think, when this was last looked at.
An interesting aspect of many accessory apartment regulations is that one of the dwellings has to be owner-occupied. So an elderly person might move into the accessory apartment and then rent out the larger home. So, you know, I think, unfortunately, the effort in 2012 got foreshortened, and we didn't accomplish anything in the end. But I think, I agree with you, I think it's worth going back and picking up where we left off. I mean, everything is practically drafted and ready to go, actually.
Just have a question. When people are creating these accessory apartments, is there some kind of oversight? Are they going to getting building permits and that kind of thing? Because there's always a safety concern when you're adding people and adding apartments and mini kitchens and what have you.
Right. Currently, the Zoning Board of Appeals grants accessory apartment permits. You may want to think about changing that to the Planning Board conceivably. They deal with this kind of thing more than the Zoning Board of Appeals, which is, you know, quasi-judicial, and it's kind of a safety valve. But yes, there is oversight, absolutely.
So the zoning board would grant the variance to allow the accessory apartment, and then it would get bounced to the planning board to
No,
go the other direction?
When I was talking about variances before, if the regulations are in the zoning law, the zoning board of appeals can grant a variance if someone requests it and needs it. So again, this would go to the planning office. They'd make application for the accessory apartment. They'd appear before the planning board. The planning board would grant the permit.
I had one question. If you rent the apartment to an elderly person only, I guess that's why it's there for them, right? I'm assuming. But then, if that person passes away, what are you doing now? You going to rent it to anyone that comes along that you want to rent to, or what? You got an empty apartment? What happens?
Right now, there's no requirement that the person be elderly, that the person be a family member. You can rent it out to anybody. And it's an apartment that is smaller. Actually, there's a provision currently regarding the size. The current provision says the floor area of the accessory dwelling unit shall be a minimum of 300 square feet and a maximum of 1,200 square feet. And the area of the accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed 33% of the floor area of the principal building on the lot.
So is that the proposed legislation, or is that in our current?
That is in the current.
The current accessory apartment. Okay. Just to clarify. Okay.
So it's clearly got to be accessory to the principal use of the property.
Right. And again, so I think that what Councilwoman Vittori was saying is just that this is a use that is conducive to aging in place. It's not necessarily that it's required that somebody be elderly. It's just that it ends up helping people who are trying to age and stay in their home if they can offset some of the costs.
When you looked into it, did you look into potential impact to the schools, or the school children would be potentially in these accessory apartments?
Back in 2012, that did not come up at all.
Okay, but we could look into that.
Sure.
You know, I just want to reiterate, we're going to have to think about housing options that are creative ways to house people who have different needs and want to live different lifestyles. And this is just one way we can examine that. You know, if you're talking accessory apartments, you're typically talking about smaller apartments. So I think you have the same, you know, relative impact on the schools that you would have in any 1 or 2 bedroom apartment scenario. So, and I don't think that you necessarily have the volume that, you know, I think it's highly unlikely that you'd end up with 200 accessory apartments in the town of Ossining at any immediate time. Usually they go in a lot more slowly than that. But I just think it's important that we look at, particularly in light of unaffordability. I mean, rent prices are skyrocketing, and some of the proposed rental, large-scale rental properties that are coming in are going to be too expensive for a lot of people who would, I'm sure, love to take advantage of them, but they're not going to be able to. So again, we need to make sure that we're looking for housing at all levels of income.
So I think you did make a point earlier that you could limit the number of accessory apartments in a community.
Absolutely.
And I guess you could also limit where that would make the most sense in, again, within which zones.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another thing that we would consider.
Right, and given the size limitation on the accessory apartment, they wouldn't be, most of them would not be that large and would not result in that many kids, if any, some, but not much.
Okay, I think that those are all really good considerations for us as we move forward. And again, I think if we could look at what the draft that you had before us, and then maybe look at some of what the potential impact would be, potential maximums and potential zones.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Anybody else? Okay, with that, I will take a motion to go into executive session for advice of counsel. And we are going to close down this location and move to another location for executive session. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Okay, all those in favor? Aye. Opposed? And thank you all very much. We will see you back at 8688 Spring Street next week for legislative session, next Tuesday, April 10th. Thank you. And wish everybody a wonderful week, and we're going to cross our fingers that the weather is going to cooperate with us this week, although I have heard some talk about wind and rain and other such things that I don't even want to say on camera. Have a great week, everybody. Be safe.